Hello and welcome to the Arise interview, 60 glorious minutes of multifaceted discussion where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things, and we feature the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Aniagolu. Coming up in the next hour, the UN is warning of new alarming trends in crime in Nigeria that's spilling over into the rest of West Africa and that could potentially destabilize the subcontinent's security, economic growth and its ability to govern. It warns that criminal networks are expanding from Nigeria through West Africa to Europe, engaging in everything from drugs and human trafficking to kidnapping, armed robbery, cybercrime, money laundering, piracy and terrorism. So can Nigerian authorities cope with this rising crime wave, or will it require urgent, concerted international action? We'll speak with a former Director General of the ECOWAS Crime Fighting Unit, a retired Major General in the Nigerian Army, and a former Controller General of the Nigerian Customs Service in a moment. Now, today in Nigeria, crime is one of the biggest and most emotionally charged issues facing Nigerians. It seems to be everywhere and is reaching a record of millions of offences each year. Despite all the tough talking from the government, the authorities still seem incapable of making any noticeable dent on the causes of crime. According to the UN, Nigeria is not only recording new alarming trends in drugs trafficking, the country is also grappling with kidnapping, arms trafficking, money laundering, human trafficking, cybercrime, piracy and terrorism, not to mention corruption. According to figures released by the Nigerian Security Tracker, a project run by the US-based Council on Foreign Relations, in the last 4 years, more than 25,000 Nigerians have died in criminal incidents related to terrorism alone. Thousands more have perished at the hands of kidnappers, pirates, robbers and gang members. Some experts have stressed the urgent need for international action and support to address this multi-pronged crime wave and the threat of criminal gangs in Nigeria. Well, to discuss this disturbing and vexatious problem, I'm joined now in the studio by a panel of experts. Dr. Abdullahi Shehu is the former Director General of the ECOWAS Crime Fighting and Anti-Money Laundering Department, known as GIABA, and is also a former Professor of Criminology at the University of Abuja. Retired Major General IBM Haruna is a former Nigerian Minister of Information and Culture. And Haman Bello Ahmed is the former Controller General of the Nigerian Customs Service. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for coming in. Really appreciate it. And I'll start with you because you're obviously sitting closest to me. What do you think is responsible for this rise in crime?
Many things are responsible, Charles. Crime is like putting the question the other way. Why do people get sick? People get sick because either they are not fed well or they are not conducting themselves well. Crime must always occur in society because crime is part and parcel of society. Crime is a reflection and manifestation of the dynamics in society. There are many, many challenges and contradictions in society that give rise to crime. I'll just go over a few, especially with new trends. But the first and most important is the population explosion in Nigeria and in West Africa. You can see that over the past decade or so, the population in Nigeria and in West Africa has really escalated exponentially. And you find a significant percentage of the population is a youth population that most of them are unemployed.
We'll get into that more a bit later in the program, but that's a good point you're making there.
The other issue has to do with the level of poverty. There is increasing population and there are fewer opportunities for people to get engaged. And as it is, the saying goes, an idle mind is the devil's workshop. So that is likely to happen. Thirdly, there is certainly poor governance. poor governance that is unable to deliver on what the people expect in terms of improving the living conditions of the people. Democracy has taken root in West Africa and in Africa indeed, but we are still struggling to see how we can entrench democracy with dividends. In other words, how do we improve the living conditions of the people so that we can prevent and control issues like crime? Fourthly, our crime fighting methods have not changed. We are still applying the didactic methods that we have been used to 40, 50 years ago. For example, if you say our law enforcement agencies should respond to a particular crime scenario, the first thing they will do is let there be a roadblock. Is it only a roadblock that we can now enforce crime? Now, with technological advancement and globalization, we have to invent and apply other new methods, inventive methods of crime prevention, including aerial surveillance. That a crime is taking place at a particular point, we should be able to detect it by other technological means. We don't have to be there physically to detect the crime. So I think there are quite a lot, and finally, I will also bring up the issue of transnationalization of criminality itself. Crime happening in one jurisdiction is invariably transferred to other jurisdictions due to the factors of globalization and technology. And there is very little you can do about it, apart from using the same inventive measures that the criminals have used to perpetrate their criminality that you will use to prevent and control criminality in society.
I suppose that the reason Haruna Hammond Bello Ahmed, the reason why there's so much concern is that the amount of crime that is taking place in Nigeria and spilling over into the subcontinent and finding its route to other parts of the world, I mean, which is why you could argue that it's a stereotype, that many Nigerians are stereotyped as criminals, but certainly there is a reason why, and the fingerprints of those criminal activities seem to be leaving themselves all over the world, really. And you were in charge of customs. Customs, of course, deal with border security in many ways. They have to cope with all of that. And there's been this argument that the porousness of Nigeria's borders not only allow people to come in, but allow people to go out into other parts of the subcontinent, etc., to commit crimes. What is your take on that?
Thank you very much. Let me first give you a bit of the history of the Customs Service. The Nigeria Customs Service was established in 1891 by the British colonial masters. The main function at that period was to collect revenue from the Southern Protectorate. And the customs has three main functions to do. The first is the collection and accounting for import, export, and excise duties. The second is to prevent and suppress smuggling, and then punish those that are involved in violating the custom laws. And the third one is to perform the functions of other agencies of government, like the Federal Inland Revenue Service today. It is the custom that collects the VAT that is supposed to be paid to the Federal Inland Revenue Service. Now, in 1988, there was this mass transfer of people from local government, from state, from federal ministries into the Nigeria Customs Service without giving them the requisite training to perform their these functions. Movement of people in and out of Nigeria is the responsibility of the Immigration Service,
right,
and they are always at the ports with the Customs Service. The responsibility of the Customs is to collect import and export and excise duties, which up to now, I think they are performing this function, but not as expected, because majority of the custom officers today are not well trained in the performance of this function.
Well, at some point later in the program, we're going to talk about something that's directly related to that, which is the importation of arms, for example, into Nigeria, the proliferation of arms, which is what is fueling a lot of crime.
You see, I was watching was it channels or one of these things, when they were interviewing the former advisor to the president. He said the crimes is in the country today. What brought about these crimes was as a result of non-enforcing of compliance with the rules and regulations of every agencies. So the problem we are facing today in this country is that our rules and regulations have been thrown away. Everybody is doing what pleases him. And that's why you will see a lot of wrong things that are happening in this country.
Okay, General IBM Haruna, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you for having me here.
You were not only a former Minister of Information, you headed various divisions of the Nigerian Army over a long period of time. And of course, the Nigerian Army is charged with the security of the country. Have Nigeria's authorities understood the causes of crime in this country and the role of the security forces and government policies in trying to check it?
Certainly, I think the authorities, the security services are well aware about the crimes. But in all fairness, I think there is a stereotyping of Nigeria as if we are the birthplace of criminality. All the pressures that causes conflicts have started long before the history of this country has been written. And it has continued. The pressure for land, the pressure for economic well-being, the pressure for resources have made us a resource and also a center of criminality from the world all over. We suffered the crisis of the expansionists, say, from North Africa. We are suffering the crisis of pressure of all other economic pressure, territorial pressure from the north. All is descending towards Nigeria and southwards. The expansion of colonialism also, although invasion from colonial masters came from the south, but they made situation and environment which in today's terms they will be called criminal activities, marauders, jihadis, and what have you. So it is nothing new, but we are now in a world of a global village. The small proportion of activities that go on is globalized, and the stereotyping is as if we are the mothers and fathers of criminality. I think most of the crimes are actually imported. Even the art of criminality is imported. The weapons of criminality is imported. So we may appear to be a leading criminal country for various other reasons, not just because crime has seated itself and that we are seen as if we're the god mafias of criminality. And I think that armed forces, the security forces, are challenged, and they are working with their counterparts of the international criminal fighting organizations. I think they are doing very well. But let us know that the causes, the main causes of criminality is lack of economic development and political amity in getting things managed in the proper course where you defeat hunger, you defeat greed, you defeat banditry, all other sorts of crime.
Well, the problem,
and of course,
General,
in modern times now, we have become so civilized that we are opposed to slavery. We are more concerned with human rights,
right,
justice, and equity.
Well, I'm going to ask you, General, to hold that thought because we have to take a break, but we'll continue this discussion. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead, including, as I said, we'll continue our discussion on the rising crime wave in Nigeria and West Africa and its potential destabilizing impact. Stay with us.
How this can be shown.
Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Aniagolu. Now, tens of thousands of people have been killed in Nigeria and across the West African subcontinent by conventional weapons such as rifles, machine guns and grenade launchers. These low-tech handheld weapons are easy to buy, easy to ship and easy to use, and they do most of the killing today. There are more than 550 million small arms currently in circulation, many of them fueling bloody insurgencies across the world, especially in places like Libya and West Africa, where Boko Haram and numerous other criminal gangs unleash almost daily terror. How do these groups get their weapons? Well, the answer is most probably through an assortment of specialized arms dealers, both individuals and countries, who ensure that supplies cannot be traced directly to the supplier. And the movie War Dogs comes readily to mind. It's about two American kids who become big-time weapons traders and get involved in illegal arms dealing. Let's take a look at the trailer.
They call guys like us war dogs, bottom feeders who make money off of war without ever stepping foot on the battlefield. It was meant to be derogatory, but we kind of liked it.
Sorry,
Kind of an emergency.
Sorry, don't worry, I have to go first. I'm American.
Give me some of that, give me some of that, give me some of that. We got delirious. Come and take a ride.
You seriously want to drive to Baghdad?
David, we're gun runners. Let's go run some guns.
Give me some of that. Give me some of that, 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 give me some of that.
You're getting closer. Come on, man, go!
You drove these through the Triangle of Death.
The Triangle of Death, bro?
And that's, of course, a dramatized version, but with a lot of truth in there. That's the trailer of the movie War Dogs, which essentially looks at two young men who get into the business of illegal gun running. Well, to continue our discussion about the nettlesome issue of rising crime with a particular focus on the proliferation of weapons, our panel of experts is still with me in the studio. Dr. Abdullahi Shehu is the former Director General of the ECOWAS Crime Fighting and Anti-Money Laundering Department, known as GIABA, and is also a former Professor of Criminology at the University of Abuja. Retired Major General IBM Haruna is a former Nigerian Minister of Information and Culture who served across this country in various military capacities. And Haman Bello Ahmed is the former Comptroller General of the Nigerian Customs Service. Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen, for staying with me. And I'll start with you, Comptroller General, because this, I suppose, falls into your province. We were talking about this previously, and that is the challenge of securing Nigeria's borders against the proliferation and illegal importation of things like arms. And everybody knows that arms are all over Nigeria. Why is that happening?
Well, the importation of arms into this country,
I mean, illegal importation.
illegal importation, you see, is as a result of non-compliance with the custom rules and regulations.
Well, obviously, I mean, criminality is
Yeah,
about
non-compliance.
non-compliance with the law.
Even in
But
cases,
it's your job to check that
yeah,
non-compliance.
that's what I'm telling you. Because the customs of today are not well trained
Right, okay.
to perform these functions.
And of course, let's remind people that you're retired.
Yes.
You're no longer, but you were once the Comptroller
Yes, I was
General.
there as a Comptroller General,
Right.
and I initiated programs of training for the officers because I know the capability of the officers. The officers of the custom today are not well trained in handling the issues of import, export, and transit matters. You see, we have about 43 codes that guides the customs in performance of their functions. One of these codes is examination of imports. Now, the law states that the terminal operator is responsible for the production of tools, equipment, and facilities for examination of goods. Today, they don't do that one. The terminal operators don't do. They are even arguing on the production of scanner. A scanner is a tool. It's an easy way for you to examine what is in a container without even offloading the goods that is there. And the law says the terminal operator or the master or the administrator of the port is responsible for the production of this scanner today, but they don't bring it. And rather they say government should buy it. I'm against that issue of asking government to bring tools for examination of goods. We have 43 courts. There is urgent need for these courts to be reviewed so that it will be of today's
standard.
Because Nigeria Customs has moved from manual examination into digital examination. So they need to review these courts, train the officers. All the officers should be carried back to training college and train them on these courts on how to deal with import, export, and transit matters. This is what is causing this problem of proliferation of arms. The last time a 40-footer container was arrested by the federal operation, and there were arms there, rocket launchers, and what has happened to it? Nothing. They said the customs should hand over to police. What is police going to do? The worst the police can do is to charge the people for illegal possession. But the main function of the custom is smuggling, and they are supposed to prosecute the importers. There is no way they will tell we don't know the importer, no way. Because the agents who are clearing these goods were given by somebody, and those agents were registered by customs. And they have their offices, addresses, everything is there. So you cannot tell me that we don't know the importer. So the customs are failing in performing their own functions based on the SEMA. The SEMA is the Custom and Excise Management Act. It's the law that guides the custom in performing their functions as the protectors of the borders in and out of the country.
Right, and let me just bring you in, Dr. Abdullahi Shehu, because you were, of course, the former Director General of the ECOWAS Crime Fighting and Anti-Money Laundering Department in West Africa. I mean, a lot of these weapons are coming in from, I understand, from places like Libya and so on, down the channel. I mean, is there a sense that because you are dealing with a transnational situation, but obviously you're looking at all the different countries as well, is there a sense that the government and the security services in Nigeria, for instance, are taken by surprise with these things? I mean, because from what I'm hearing, it just sounds like nobody has a handle on what is actually going on. I mean, he's got good advice, you've got good advice, but you were all in office at one point, and the weapons situation, yes, it's worsened, but it's been bad for years.
Well, I must confess we are still dancing in cycle, but let me tell you that as soon as we got on board in Dakar, Senegal, our headquarters, some 12 years ago, we had to develop programs and projects within the context of promoting and deepening the ECOWAS regional integration policy. One area that was of concern and within our mandate was to look at trafficking. And when we say trafficking, we define trafficking to include trafficking in drugs, in arms, in human beings, etc., etc. So on each of these, we wanted to approach the problem from a scientific perspective, an integrated perspective. So first, we undertook typology studies on what was the extent and magnitude of drug trafficking in West Africa. What was the extent of small arms smuggling and proliferation in West Africa? What was the extent of the human trafficking problems? And we aggregated all this into one component and came out to the ECOWAS Council of Ministers with a project. One of the components of the project was to support, beginning with the weaker states, with equipment that will improve the control measures for control of illegal movement of arms. So we had a project to support member countries with scanners. Scanners are not things that we should go to the basic. For example, in an economy like Nigeria, where the Controller General of Customs can buy 20 in a day, and he has the resources to do that. But we were looking at the weaker countries. In fact, we understood that we were as strong as our weakest points. So we attacked those countries by providing them the leverage to be able to prevent the proliferation of those arms, illegal arms, from their own territories before getting to other parts of West Africa. That program has been built upon over the years, and I believe that is still ongoing in different dimensions. We encourage our central banks to introduce new policies, that is why you see this cashless policy came in. In addition to that, we encourage them to develop policies such as financial inclusion, so that they can bring those who are outside the financial system into the financial system, so that we can regulate the financing of terrorism, the financing of insurgency, etc., etc. But you see, as I said from the beginning, no input is enough to solve a fundamental problem, and one that has a regional and global manifestation. Concerted efforts are required. At the country level, there must be sufficient coordination and cooperation among and between agencies. Is the custom cooperating with the immigration at the border, and the NDLA and other agencies that are at the border? If they are really cooperating, then we should have reduced this problem to the barest minimum. The root cause of lack of compliance or whatever he is talking about is corruption. We compromise a lot of things for our personal interests. And once there is a compromise, no matter how good a policy is, it cannot make the desired impact.
Okay, retired Major General Haruna. Yes. I mean, you have been there. You've been there at the very pivot of Nigerian governance, right at the very top with all the rest of them. Your job as a soldier was to secure this country and prevent a lot of incidents like this happening. I've just been told that I'll ask you to hold on because we're going to have to take a break, but we'll continue this discussion when I come back. You're watching the Arise interview, plenty more still ahead, including we'll continue our discussion on the rising crime wave in Nigeria and West Africa and its destabilizing impact. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Aniegolu. Now, the other big criminal issue in Nigeria is, of course, terrorism. Thousands killed over the last 4 years in the northeast, and just on Sunday, 30 more died at the hands of suicide bombers, and more than 40 others were injured in the assault. The attack happened outside a hall where people were gathered to watch television in the town of Kanduga in Borno State, and is believed to have been carried out by the Boko Haram jihadist group. Last week, Boko Haram fighters invaded a military formation in Borno, killing at least 6 soldiers, including an army commander. And so it continues week after week, the insurgency raging on without an end in sight. Well, to continue our discussion about the nettlesome issue of rising crime, our panel of experts is still with me in the studio. Dr. Abdullahi Shehu is the former Director General of the ECOWAS Crime Fighting and Anti-Money Laundering Department, known as GIABA, and is also a former Professor of Criminology at the University of Abuja. Retired Major General IBM Haruna is a former Nigerian Minister of Information and Culture who has perhaps it's proper to say that he's been at the helm of security in this country, as far as the army is concerned. And Haman Bello Ahmed is the former Controller General of the Nigerian Customs Service. Thank you very much indeed for staying with us. And Major General Haruna, sadly we took a break when you were just about to speak, and you can certainly pick up from where we left off. But I'd like to ask you this. Is this rise in crime? We've talked about the proliferation of weapons. We've talked about, you know, criminal gangs, all kinds of things taking place in Nigeria. Is this rise in crime respective or irrespective of who's in power and what's happening in the Nigerian economy?
It could be both. But the important thing to note is that war and insurgency and terrorism, they are not only criminal acts, but they are instruments of foreign policy. They are instruments of business. The illegal arms we are complaining of that encourage criminals may have been gotten from our own armories, the legally imported armories. But they could also be with migration, immigrant criminals. They could also be planted to create instability and havoc, because it is part of a strategic concept of those who make the arms. They need the business and the market for the arms.
And they see a country like Nigeria where they think that security is lax.
Yes, they
and
see a
therefore
country
they
where
take advantage of
security is not only lax, but security has to be subterraneously uprooted, because they see that the emergence of Nigeria or power of Nigeria and a stable, strong economy can also be inimical to their own economic and strategic plots. So on the international plane, even your friends can be planning to sabotage you by not understanding that arms which is made in his country is being imported through very dubious means to your country in order to forestall your development, or to get you in a corner where you can have some diplomatic negotiations to an advantage.
Dr. Abdullahi talked about earlier, Dr. Abdullahi Shehu talked about, and I think he touched on a very crucial point, which is, never mind what's going on in the rest of the world, what's happening in Nigeria is staggering levels of corruption. To what extent do you think that that fuels crime in this country and allows this sort of thing to take place?
Well, it fuels crime in the sense that it's only the elites who have access and benefit from the corruption.
No, we're not. Corruption is not just officially sanctioned theft or embezzlement of large amounts of money. It's the person who's in charge of the armory in the army allowing arms to filter out illegally. It's the policeman who's standing on the road who should be checking people but is collecting money from people rather than checking them, and therefore people go free.
I did not bring that within the boundaries of corruption, but indiscipline and disobedience of orders. There is no armed security forces that allow arms to be unaccounted, unregistered, unchecked. Even these ones you see in the bush, if you look at them well, you will see that there's an identification on those rifles for those that are taken from internal sources.
Well, let me tell you an experience I had once. I came into Nigeria and I went to Port Harcourt. And I was doing a story there, and I met some soldiers. I mean, they were guarding this particular area, so refinery or whatever. They were very friendly and jovial. And I, just out of curiosity, I said, well, you know, what is it like carrying these guns around and knowing that you're armed and so on and so forth? And what do you do when things happen? And the guy cocked his gun and fired off a few rounds into the air. And I said to him, but don't you account for the bullets you've just expended? I mean, if you go back, because clearly you're given a magazine, if you go back and that magazine of bullets is less than what it should be, doesn't somebody ask you any questions? He laughed and he said, oh, we know how we get around these things. I mean, that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about.
Yes, that is the kind of thing you are talking about. I, as a professional, I'll tell you straight away, it's an unprofessional exhibition. It is not expected. It happens because, yes, there is a large atmosphere of insecurity, unaccountability, and it rose highly, particularly after our civil war, because there was so much weapons and ammunition around the place that were unaccountable. There was no battlefield clearance or accountability of arms that came legally to either side. So we have inherited a problem which perhaps we have not solved.
Right.
Because
clearly we haven't solved
We haven't solved it.
Right.
But
Well,
there are challenges that could have been nicked in the bud immediately after the Civil War.
Yeah, that's a good point. Let me bring Dr. Abdullahi Shehu in, because he pointed out that a lot of this started at the end of the Civil War, a lot of proliferation of arms and so on. But at the end of that Civil War, you could see the governments taking decisive action to check crime. I mean, one of the big problems at the time was armed robbery. And there was no messing around. If you were caught robbing someone, whether you killed them or not with firearms, you'd be executed. And that shocked people, but it also brought crime down dramatically. So what I'd like to ask you, is the answer to be tougher on crime one of the answers? Because someone we had on the program some time ago pointed out that there should be, for instance, harsher penalties for kidnapping, for example, because perhaps the death penalty and public executions like there used to be, as I said, for armed robbery. I mean, would that work in your estimation?
Well, deterrence is an effective criminal crime prevention strategy, but it depends on how it is applied. You see, for any of those offenses we are talking about, there is a penalty in Nigeria and in all the countries in West Africa. Therefore, we can only understand the continuity of the problem based on the existing circumstances we found ourselves. Most of the people caught in these offenses have not been prosecuted. And even if they are prosecuted, the criminal justice system is so weak that you don't know the outcome of somebody charged to court, and that is all. You don't hear anything about that. Early this year, the statistics given by the police is like they have arrested close to 1,000 people who were involved in kidnapping. What has happened to them? If they are keeping them somewhere in a cell, they are draining the economy. Because if you go into all prisons in this country, majority of the inmates are awaiting trial. So why should that be so? Is it not possible to set up, even if it is a tribunal, to say we have to decongest the prison and let us do justice to all manner of people? If you are awaiting trial, what is your offense? Bring you before the tribunal, try you within a short time. If you are found guilty, you are convicted, you go to prison, and you serve your sentence. If you are not, they set you free. This will send a credible deterrence. But the main problem where we really need to hit hard is we need to change our strategic approach to dealing with these issues. Community policing has been something that has been flagged for a long time, but we have not been able to implement it. Again, it's because of our vested interests. Some people are calling for state police. What is the difference between state police and the community policing? Make the police, the community policing effective. You will not need even a state police. But again, what are the incentives for the community policing to work effectively? If you give information to the police, are you sure that the police will manage the information and get to the root of the problem? How are you sure? Most people don't believe that if they give information to the police will use the information in the proper way and get into the root of the problem. And that is why that has caused the declining image of the police in society. So we need to look at that. We also need to look at the kind of investment we have made to fighting crime. Since democracy, 20 years ago that we have been practicing democracy, we go to the National Assembly to negotiate for budget every year. Budgets are allocated. When they bring the following year, they don't ask what happened to the previous one. So we are just putting inputs without expecting good output. We have to monitor and evaluate the impact of the input we are putting in our system to show whether what we are doing is really working or not. But in all the programs we are running in our governance, there is no monitoring and evaluation mechanism. So if you are in an office, you have been appointed to that office, do what you like, do what you can. At the end of the day, you give chance to somebody. If you can take whatever you can take, go and hide yourself somewhere, fine for you. And business as usual will continue. Then we keep on pretending that, well, this thing is because insurgency is a different kind of criminality, is an unconventional war. over 10 years, we cannot train our soldiers to fight unconventional war? Is there no terrorism in the curriculum of our military when they go to staff college? Can we not improve the number of people who can specialize in that area? What about the foreign assistance we have been receiving? What is the impact of that on our economy? Somebody should sit down and ask questions. The investment we are making, is it producing the right kind of results that we expect? If that is not, then we should not be expecting that we will do the same things and expect a different result. So we need to change our approach. We need to change our methods of crime fighting. We need also to change our collaboration with our immediate neighbors in the region as well as in the global community.
Okay. Brilliant thesis there. I'm going to say, well, we just stay with us. We've got another 15 minutes to go. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead, including we'll continue our discussion on the rising crime wave in Nigeria and West Africa and its destabilizing impact. Stay with us. Back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Anyagolu. So why is crime so prevalent in Nigeria, and why is violent crime so easy apparently to commit? Well, according to analysts, with most of the population aged less than 45, this country has more younger people in it, and therefore it is going to have more violent crime. It's a sort of almost like the law of gravity, because older people commit violent crimes at a far lower rate than younger people. Well, the experts say there is a second reason that's really intriguing, especially in the case of Nigeria, and that is that older people in Nigeria also engage in lots of crime, albeit the white-collar kind, such as corruption, embezzlement, and officially sanctioned theft. So whereas in most societies there is the effect of older people in community civilizing the younger people with regard to crime, that does not appear to be the case in Nigeria. As one Nigerian musician pointed out in a popular music video, everybody in Nigeria is a criminal in Nigeria. Well, to talk more about this, our panel of experts is still with me in the studio. Dr. Abdullahi Shehu is the former Director General of the ECOWAS Crime Fighting and Money Laundering Department, known as GIABA, and is also a former Professor of Criminology at the University of Abuja. Retired Major General IBM Haruna is a former Nigerian Minister of Information and Culture who was at the very pivot of the army in Nigeria. And Haman Bello Ahmed is the former Comptroller General of the Nigerian Customs Service. Thank you very much indeed to all of you for staying with us. Let's look at the right messages that need to be sent and the best tactics that need to be deployed to clean up on crime. We've been the beneficiaries of your collective wisdom and your collective experience, and I'm sure many people who are watching this program will take a lot of positive things away and a better understanding of what is going on. But let's now aggregate that into solutions. Executions and the death penalty for kidnapping and terrorism, local government and state policing rather than federal policing, as has been suggested, zero tolerance for crimes. You talked about bringing Nigeria into the digital age, CCTV cameras, and that phrase again, total enforcement. Can these tactics make a difference?
Yeah, thank you. I think it can. I will talk on the side of the customs. Because of the importation and proliferation of arms, drugs, and so many other things. And I have said in this program that the bottom line for that is lack of training and lack of enforcing compliance with the existing laws and regulation of the service. The service needs today to have a total restructuring of the service. Carry all these officers back to the training college. Train them on custom procedures and guidelines so that they will enforce compliance with the laws and regulation of the service. Not only in valuation, not only in classification, but also in the compliance with the rules and regulation of the service.
But of course, when you're not paying people enough money, or certainly the perception is that they're not being paid well, and there is also the sense that, you know, here we are in the middle of Nigeria, sometimes they're not even paid at all, from what I understand.
It's not that they are not paid.
Doesn't that orient people towards crime?
No, it's not that they are not paid. All these things are there in the custom regulations. They are all there. For example, if you have a discovery, if you make a discovery of an item, and the duty that was paid, maybe it was 100 million, the duty that was paid, and in the course of your checking and counter-checking, you found that it's supposed to pay 200 million, and you issue a demand notice, and it is paid. The laws of the custom says you should be given 5% of that money, depending on the rate
That
of
is
duty.
the person who got the money back.
The person that discovered this. You should be given 5% or 3%, depending on the rate of duty. Today's the rate of duty in Nigeria and all the ECOWAS countries, the highest rate of duty is 35%. So an officer who made a discovery in the course of his work is supposed to get 5% of that discovery. This thing is not done today. An officer will be sent on transfer. He's supposed to get his transport money, hotel accommodation. It's not done. All these things are not done. They throw it.
Yeah, but why isn't it done?
It's the policy of the government, I can say.
The policy is to put a rule into
The
a rule
rules
book
are
and
there.
then disobey that
You see,
rule.
the rules are there, but they are not being enforced. They are
Okay,
not being
let me
complied.
bring-
That's what I told you.
Right.
That we need to enforce compliance with our rules and regulations.
That's a good point. Let me bring General Haruna in, because you were shaking your head.
Yes, I was shaking my head because the criminality that is going on now has been inspired, motivated by the failure to apply the Criminal Justice Act, and the criminal justice system is being applied warpfully, I would say, in a sort of discriminatory way. Now, the protest has arisen because over the short years, if you look back, the governors of today, during the colonial times, they are no more than residents. Today, they are monetized benefits from the public goes far more than what the Governor General of Nigeria as a whole was enjoying. And as a result, you've ended up with educated youths who are jobless. What does one expect? There must be a reaction. So this reaction is a competition, a reaction, I say, against the unwholesome benefits being derived by being in the elite group of leadership and governance of the country.
Right.
Well, it's a kind of protest.
Right.
I think that they should look into making benefits more equitable and relevant to the development of a society. But the gap in society now has become so wide, there's hardly anything called middle class anymore. You're either poor or you're ultra rich.
Well, actually, just to take you up on something that was mentioned earlier, which was community police, because obviously urgent measures have to be taken. I mean, all the problems can't be solved at once, but there have to be priorities. What is the main priority to solving crime, or at least reducing it to a point where people can say, yes, the government is actually doing something? One of the things that's been suggested is passing more policing responsibility to the community and the local governments, the states, and so on and so forth. But of course, one of the groups that has traditionally opposed community policing and state policing has been the army, because the army has always been a federalized organization, and a country that had military rule for a long period of time wanted everything to remain federalized in order to make it easier to control. But that doesn't seem to be working when it's being dealt on the federal level.
Well, as far as the structure and the devolution of power of the federation is concerned, yes, the federal center needs to be as powerful to ensure the continuity of the sovereignty of this country. But that is not to say that the distribution of power to the various strata of the federation and to the lower echelons of governance of the people has been properly structured. In fact, during the colonial times, security was sufficiently structured that the community were doing community policing, perhaps even unconsciously, but the system provided from the NA to the districts and so on, any strange act can be investigated, discovered, and proper action taken against it. But with the present constitution and distribution of power, that has not dispersed enough power, and where it has dispersed power, it has not allowed that power to be exercised, because those who emasculate the fund and the wherewithals, particularly from the state and between the state and the local government, have just turned the lower echelon of governance to stooges. And as at now, the states and local governments hardly produce their audited accounts. So there is no transparency,
Right,
there is no
okay.
accountability.
Right, we've literally got 1 minute left, and I'm going to bring you in with a final word, Dr. Abdullahi Shehu. Where do we go from here?
Well, the national counter-terrorism strategy presupposes that there will be a convergence between the hard and the soft approaches to preventing crime. On the hard approach, I think we need to improve our methodology. We need to create rapid response forces that can bring succor to affected communities within the shortest possible time, and thereafter sustain peace within such communities.
Okay, on that
Secondly,
note, I'm really sorry about this. I know you have a lot
Very
to
good.
say, but unfortunately we're out of time. I want to thank the three of you, Dr. Abdullahi Shehu, retired Major General IBM Haruna, and Haman Bello Ahmed. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for this edition of the Arise interview. Join us again for a fresh edition tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja, bye-bye, and thank you for watching. Thank you.